So I'd like to welcome everyone joining us with our moderator, Shelly, and our panelists, Dr. Linklater, Dr. Robbins, Dr. Wells, and community member Trisha Trudeau. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Chantal Moraes. I am the project manager for Shkaabe Makwa at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I am here to provide you with a traditional opening. So as I had said, my name is Chantal. Creator knows me as she carries the light. I am Haudenosaunee Mohawk from Bay of Quinte on my mother's side, and Irish on my father's side. I proudly acknowledge both sets of ancestors. I am situated on the lands known as Toronto and call Toronto my home currently today, and I sit with the Bear Clan. So I'd like to welcome you all here today. And please know that I am holding tobacco in my hand, which I am virtually offering to all of our panelists as I discussed with them prior to the webinar. And I am offering that tobacco in that creation to the contract and connection that they are going to make through sharing their knowledge and their expertise on community collaboration, and that connection with that exchange of tobacco, even though it's being done virtually, is a connection between themselves and creator and their ancestors. So that way they come with a good mind and a good heart, and they share in a good way. So as we do this opening, I'd like to say Nialagoa to Creator for bringing us all here in good health, with open minds and open hearts to be able to share in such an important topic. And when we think back to those traditional relationships that we built in community, they very much were relationships of collaboration. So if we think about that two-row wampum teaching that we have, where we've created those partnerships and we work together in collaboration, this is where we find ourselves today as we sit together and we have these conversations to continue to work. So I know that everyone here is excited to learn, and I ask that Creator continues to provide us with opportunities where we are able to stand shoulder to shoulder and work in such good ways for the advancement of research and knowledge sharing through reciprocal relationships moving forward. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Shelly Hachey. Nialagoa.
Thank you, Chantal. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. It's titled Relationship and Collaboration in Research with First Nations Communities. My name is Shelly Hachey, and I'm honored to be your host and facilitator for today. So I want to just first start by thanking you, Chantal, for your kind words and your opening today and opening us up in a good way. And of course, a big thank you to all of our guests and our panelists for joining us today. I'm very proud to be here with you to explore important topics around Indigenous wellness, healing, and respectful community engagement. Before we get in, I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I was born in Hamilton, Ontario. I now live in Caledonia. My family comes from 6 Nations of the Grand River Territory. We are Oneida on my dad's side, and on my mom's side, I come from a French-Canadian roots in Nova Scotia. I'm a proud mom, 4 amazing kids. I'm an auntie, I'm a sister. I'm a lifelong learner. I hold a bachelor's and a master's degree in social work, both centered on holistic balance and reclaiming identity. Currently, I'm working on my PhD. I'm a PhD candidate, focusing on supporting children, specifically children in the child welfare system who've been displaced, with an emphasis on healing and well-being. Professionally, I serve as a research manager with Shkaabe Makwa CAMH. I'm the manager of the First Nations Wellness Initiative, which is a community-led research partnership with 3 First Nations. We're currently working with 3 First Nations communities, the Saugeen First Nation, Walpole Island First Nation, and Wiikwemkoong Unceded territory. Our work is rooted in building strong relationships and developing wellness strategies that meet communities' unique needs. It's truly an honor to walk alongside communities, allies, and Indigenous people as we work together towards wellness.
I have lost sound for Shelly.
As have
No,
I. I've lost sound for Shelly as well.
you cannot hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Uh-oh. Okay. So we're going to begin. I'm not sure when I cut out, but we'll just start. We're going to begin the webinar with brief introductions from each panelist. And then we're going to engage in a discussion on community collaboration, allyship, and respectful engagement. And then finally, we're going to open up the floor to questions from our audience. So I'm really looking forward to this meaningful and thoughtful conversation. And thank you again, everyone, panelists and guests, for being here. So as I said, we're gathered today to explore how to build genuine, respectful partnerships with First Nations communities through research. And through research that's collaborative, culturally safe, and mutually beneficial. So first, I'm going to begin by introducing our esteemed panelists. We'll start with Dr. Rennie Linklater. Dr. Rennie Linklater is the Senior Director of Shkaabe Makwa, CAMH. She's a visionary leader, deeply rooted in the movement towards Indigenous health justice. As the Senior Director of Shkaabe Makwa, the first Indigenous-led hospital-based center in Canada, Dr. Linklater is at the forefront of transforming mental health care for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across Ontario. Her leadership, under her leadership, Shkaabe Makwa advances holistic wellness through culturally grounded models of care, traditional healing practices, and community-driven research. With decades of experience as a scholar, advocate, and change maker, Dr. Linklater continues to center Indigenous knowledge in mental health systems and create space for healing, innovation, and community leadership. Next, we have Dr. Julian Robbins. He's the Manager of Research and Knowledge Mobilization at Shkaabe Makwa. Dr. Robbins brings a powerful blend of academic expertise and community engagement to his role as Manager of Research and Knowledge Mobilization at Shkaabe Makwa. He's a champion of Indigenous data sovereignty and OCAP principles. Dr. Robbins plays a key role in fostering respectful, reciprocal research relationships between institutions and First Nations communities. His leadership supports a dynamic team of researchers working directly with communities to generate actionable, community-owned knowledge. With a strong background in ethics, relationality, and advocacy, Dr. Robbins ensures that Indigenous voices remain central in shaping research priorities and outcomes. Welcome. Next, we have Trisha Trudeau. She's the Special Projects Coordinator for the First Peoples Wellness Circle. Trisha Trudeau is an Anishinaabe from Wiikwemkoong Unceded territory and a deeply respected voice in Indigenous wellness and mental health. With a Master's of Science and a passion for trauma-informed community-based approaches, Trisha supports key initiatives at the People's Wellness Circle, a national Indigenous-led organization focused on healing and wellness. She brings skillful coordination, strategic thinking, and cultural insight to every project she leads. Beyond her professional work, Trisha contributes her expertise to multiple advisory and governance roles within her home community, championing data sovereignty, self-determination, and systemic change. Welcome, Trisha. And we also have Dr. Samantha Wells, who is a senior scientist at CAMH and a professor at the Daliana School of Public Health of Psychiatry in the University of Toronto. Dr. Samantha Wells is a leading researcher in mental health policy and a committed ally in community-led approaches to wellness. As a senior scientist at CAMH and professor at the University of Toronto, Dr. Wells brings a wealth of experience to collaborative projects that center Indigenous perspectives and priorities. She co-leads the First Nations Wellness Initiative along Dr. Rennie Linklater, which is a CHIR-funded partnership focused on local data gathering and strategy development led by and for communities. Her work is grounded in respect, humility, and a deep commitment to supporting Indigenous leadership in research and policy development. Thank you and welcome, Sam. Thank you all for being here. So first, how this is going to work is we'll do brief introductions from each panelist, and then we'll engage in a conversation around community collaboration, allyship, and respectful engagement. And then finally, we'll open up the floor for questions. So to start, I would like to invite each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and share their experience working with First Nations communities and what relationship and collaboration mean to them in research. And Rennie, I think we are going to start with you now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shelly, for your introductions and really grounding us in being together today to talk about these areas of research. And when I sit back and think about the importance of collaboration, for me, it's really an opportunity to bring together a lot of different knowledges, a lot of different experiences, and a lot of different skills that all share that same vision that we move forward on to improving wellness for our communities. And, you know, when I think of where we're positioned at CAMH, Shkaabe Makwa is its own center, and we, you know, as we've been growing over these last 5 years, I would say that, you know, our position within the system in working with a lot of our community partners and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis organizations creates, I would say, a real opportunity to leverage the experiences and some of the expertise that we have at CAMH and really connect them in a collaborative way. But I think what becomes paramount is understanding dynamics and, you know, the history of research and how that has really unfolded in our communities. And I look at our roles as not only unpacking some of that, but ensuring that we're really thoughtful around safe processes. And what's been really unique with us is that we've been able to collaborate with many of the research centers across CAMH, and whether that's the Institute for Mental Health Policy Research, which does a lot more social and policy research in terms of linking in with our communities, but we're also you know, collaborating with other centers, and whether that's, you know, bringing forward addiction medicine services, whether that's exploring neurodisabilities within our communities and looking for new interventions or new ways of providing care, or even I'm thinking some of the collaborative work that Julian's doing and will speak to is working with our research centers around data governance and those really important pieces. And so for collaboration, those would be some of the priorities and ways that we really need to think through. And of course, really collapsing that power model. And what I really like to think through is just that, you know, we are in a circle together. We bring to that circle various different skills and, you know, experiences, but together, if we listen to each other, then that collaborative spirit will really guide the work.
Thank you so much, Rennie. Welcome. Julian, would you like to introduce yourself and speak a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Shelly. What do I say? I'll start by saying Walalin Gilsuk, Walalin the Kitchenu Sitkumu Unceded Koe, Weda Salamurok, Dawisi Migagus Nagosed, Lewa Siknik, Big Magi Muenig, Wedabexi, Dawisi Julian Robbins, Chatham, Ontario, Siknik Magi, and yeah, so what I just said was, you know, welcome, giving thanks to the Creator and the Mother Earth, and in the Mi'kmaq language, saying that on my mom's side, come from this area called Siknik Mi'kma'ki, which is the borders of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and my dad's side, southwestern Ontario, just outside of Chatham. There's a little hamlet called North Buxton, where there are stops on the Underground Railroad. So there are Black people there, and there are people like me. There are a number of Afro-Indigenous people that made their way up from the Eastern United States in the mid 1800s. So that's sort of where I'm from, and I've been with this great team, Shkaabe Makwa, since September 2023, and really sort of enjoying the work. And you know, it's yeah, it's very dynamic. It's very exciting. I think, you know, for myself, with respect to being able to sort of understand like how I frame, you know, sort of Indigenous involvement versus, you know, sort of being open as well to allies of, you know, any other cultural background or whatever. It goes back to, you know, I think for me, like a teaching that sort of helps me like sort of frame it, I think, right? And the teaching is about kindness, honesty, sharing, and strength. And you know, so kindness is about being flexible. So it's represented by the sweet grass. You know, when an animal lies on the grass, you know, it goes down, but you know, after a while, it'll come back up on its own. So that's the kindness. And then honesty is represented by the tree, and the teaching is you can go out into the bush, you can find a tree as straight as you are and a tree as crooked as you are. But the thing about a tree is it's always going towards the light. So that's the honesty part. And they say that, you know, the teaching is that those two things will be recognizable amongst any human being, like all around the world. So use those things like as far as like your collaboration. The second two might have a little bit more cultural specificity, which are sharing, which is represented, could be represented by the buffalo or the deer. For us, Indigenous people represents sacrifice, right? So that may be a little bit more different than other cultures. And strength is represented by the mountain, and it's not like, you know, physical strength or might. It's the strength in the faith that we have in natural law. So the, you know, that things will keep happening as they should, and that's why we're thankful. You know, so those things that just occur in the background, like the sun rising and you know, all those sorts of things like that happen every day, that represents the strength. So from the Indigenous perspective, you know, for myself, those last two, sharing and strength, sort of allow me to kind of differentiate between, you know, when I'm talking to allies or people from other cultures, but also be able to do it in a kind and honest way. So so I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for your sharing. Welcome. Trisha, would you like to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your experiences in the research relationship?
Yeah, miigwech Shelly. Ani Kinawea, Trisha Trudeau, Dijnakaz, Wiikwemkoong, Donjaba. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Trisha Trudeau, and I'm from Wiikwemkoong, Unceded Territory. First of all, I want to extend a big miigwech to CAMH for inviting me to sit on this panel. I was very honored to have been asked. Some of my background in research stems long before I was part of the First Nations Wellness Initiative project within Wiikwemkoong. So I've worked on a variety of different projects that have given me the opportunity and to be welcomed into other communities and other First Nations. So that has definitely helped expand my knowledge on working with different communities. Something that I'm really passionate about in terms of working with community and different research institutes is amplifying the voices of our community members. So that way research really does benefit community members. And it's not just something that's taken away, because historically research with First Nations communities was something that was always it was something that was not always done in a good way. So something that I learned early on and really wanted to help amplify is to make sure our community members are heard and taken into consideration when research is done with communities. So being a part of these different collaborative projects has really been meaningful for me, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with so many amazing Indigenous researchers as well as non-Indigenous researchers. But yeah, I don't want to get into too much, knowing that we still have some time to get to other questions. So I will end there and then get into more details.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Finally, Sam, would you like to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your experiences?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. Chantal, thank you for the opening, and it's lovely to be in this panel with some just incredible experts in the area. And Trisha, so excited that you're here. So I'm Samantha Wells. Shelly gave an introduction around my background, but I will say, just to share with you all that I'm a settler here. I arrived in Canada when I was 10 from England, and so completely open up and want to share that as well. That my journey in research has I think historically, I was trained in sociology and epidemiology, very Western-based sciences, and much of that training, especially in the early days, did not bring a lens around Indigenous knowledge, experience, expertise. In fact, was largely ignoring that background, and so I'm very mindful of that. And so around, I think it was 2012, was my first experience working with a First Nations community, and that was Kettle and Stony Point First Nation back then. And that's when I actually, I would say, it really opened my eyes, and I worked really closely with Rennie at that time. It was such an amazing experience to get to know Rennie and Rennie's team and watch that team grow and share their incredible knowledge and experience from Shkaabe Makwa. But also, when I started working with Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, I started working with Dr. Julie George, a member of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation, who shared incredible insights from a community perspective, but also from her own research journey. And to me, as an ally, I think the most important thing is really listening to the expertise that comes from Indigenous scholars and community members, and never assume you know everything. You never do. It's a constant process of learning, and always situating yourself as a humble individual with a perspective of kindness and love, and always knowing that you can learn and evolve. It's a constant state of sharing and listening, and so I think that's just incredibly important. I think that's all I'm going to say now, because I know there's lots of questions to come now, and thank you again so much, and looking forward to the next part of the panel.
Okay, great, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So I just want to thank you for all your thoughtful insights, and I can hear loud and clear that relationship building and that trust and that relational accountability to community and to ourselves is at the heart of all of the work that we're doing. So let's dive into some key themes. So we're going to start with you, Julian. So this question will be for you, and then the panelists will have an opportunity to also respond. So the question is, when starting a research partnership with First Nations communities, what are some key steps you take to build genuine trust from the very beginning? And in your experience, what does respectful community engagement look like, especially when communities may be cautious of outside researchers?
Thanks, Shelly. Yeah, it's Yeah, really good question, and I don't think there's like a one size fits all answer to it. I think right because but I would say probably overall like the most important thing with respect to building that genuine trust from the very beginning would be coming in with an attitude of humility, right? And I was sort of reminiscing about a graduate course I taught at York some years back, and it's a master's level course, so most of the folks were research is new, right? You're doing like a research project, and 95% of those researchers were non-Indigenous, so there was a very um, people are excited about wanting to do things, I think, right? But you know you kind of have to be like you have to, I guess, incorporate some humility. It's like some people hadn't even contacted communities or had no relationship at all, and they were going to do these great grandiose things, I think, right? And it was just, it was too much. It was kind of like overstepping. So I think, that positionality piece of recognizing who you are like as a researcher and sort of really sort of digging into that, like, and orienting yourself doesn't mean that anything you're not going to do will be useful. It will be, as long as it's a humble sort of approach kind of thing, right? And um I think that you know there's that research part, like the relationships you're entering into. If you're new, you're entering into that community, they already have like relationships that exist, before you get there, kind of thing, right? So, it's very important to sort of acknowledge those, right? And, you go in and you say, this is my methodology, whether it's, participatory action, community-based or community-driven. To a certain extent, those are just labels, right? Because it really depends on the status of your relationships that kind of imbue like those different methodologies with meaning, right? So it's the important thing is to kind of really focus on developing those good relationships from the beginning, right? And if they're cautious, of outside researchers, communities are cautious. I think, one thing would be to say, is this actually the right fit? Am I doing the right thing? Right? That's the first thing that comes to mind, I think, right? And if you still, feel that you need to go ahead, I think, where are your contacts in the communities? Who are the Indigenous researchers that you're working with if you're non-Indigenous? Are you able to present the case to the community, which talks about, you know, um, uh, talks about what Trisha was mentioning about the history of the research and sort of the extractive nature, the historical, trajectory. Most of the research was extractive, right? But now that you have, a greater autonomy, you have more Indigenous researchers, you have more Indigenous people getting graduate degrees. Communities are just becoming generally more aware of research and what it means. So, there's always that piece. If they're still cautious, you're going to have to address like those stereotypes and go and say like, this is what our community research, community-driven research does. This is meant to lift people up. This is meant to be useful in the community. This is meant to be developed together. We're not coming in and sort of imposing a research framework, or we're coming in to try to help to join your circle kind of thing, right? And work that way kind of thing, right? So rather than like saying, okay, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna do this, maybe find out what's going on in the community already and like attend, and then sort of maybe you talk to a few people that you need to talk to during that event when people are already there. So I'll stop there because I know we're moving. We only have an hour, so thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you so much. And I completely agree. Like the research relationship is absolutely central, and it's not how we say we're going to do it, but how we actually do it that matters. And allies and guests coming into community have a responsibility to do their work and to understand the history and to actively be in relationship and noting that that takes time, patience and kindness. So thank you so much, Julian. I'm going to ask the panelists if they would like to respond to this question. Perhaps Rennie, would you like to also respond?
I think just in the interest of time, maybe I'll go on to the next question.
The next question, okay.
Okay, unless anyone else wants to respond to this one specifically.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so our question for Shelly, so what role can non-First Nations researchers play in supporting respectful collaboration while avoiding colonial dynamics? So how can allies respectfully engage in ceremony and cultural practices? And how can they educate themselves and reflect on their own biases throughout their work with community?
Thanks so much, Shelly. You know, this is really interesting because as I was reflecting on non-Indigenous, you know, people's roles within research, I actually started thinking about my own role as a First Nations researcher. And, you know, I come from Rainy River First Nations, which is also known as Manitou Rapids. That's located in the traditional territory of Treaty Number 3 in Northwestern Ontario. And I started my graduate work at University of Toronto in 2000, so 25 years ago. And I, you know, I have to say that that was a very different time than it is now for Indigenous academics that are, you know, beginning graduate school, whether that's a master's program or whether that's a PhD. And I did both my master's and PhD at the University of Toronto. So I was, you know, kind of brought into this circle. And what's interesting for me is that both of my supervisors were non-Indigenous. And when I think back at some of, you know, the commentary that I was working through initially within my master's project, and I was doing a lot of work, I would say in my own life about unpacking how colonization had, you know, impacted my family. It had impacted my work experiences when I was working in politics, in First Nations politics. And, you know, when I think about just those different levels. And as I was doing that, I started writing about it. And one of my non-Indigenous committee members circled the word decolonizing at one point and asked me if I could use a term that was more positive. And I remember sitting back thinking, oh boy, I might have a problem here. So, but you know what? I continued on with that committee for 4 years, and I ended up shifting. I ended up really, you know, kind of thinking through the supervisor that I had, who was really important. She was she was a therapist by background and really led the anti-psychiatry movement. So she was an important teacher for me in understanding how we needed to critique mental health and mental health treatment. But I felt that she could only take me so far. And then I needed to switch to a different supervisor who was also non-Indigenous. And, but I would also say he was very Indigenous to Ireland and came with those teachings and had been on this lifelong journey to be able to learn more about spirituality and culture in his own frameworks. He had also retired by the time he took me on as a student. And I really felt that he rescued me. And I also feel that he had faith in me and he believed in me in times that I wasn't even sure that I believed in myself, in terms of being a doctoral student. And so I think about, you know, the role that PhD supervisors have in terms of, you know, being non-Indigenous allies and really helping to create and support spaces for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to obtain their masters and their PhDs. And so that actually just came to me, you know, in terms of sharing how do we find ourselves in these spaces as researchers as well. And then once I came to CAMH, and it was the same time I was defending my thesis, my PhD thesis, and just beginning to work in the hospital. And that's, you know, within about 6 months, I met Sam for the first time, which was really great because they were working with 2 First Nation communities, Kettle Stony Point and Aamjiwnaang First Nation. And I actually really appreciated that, you know, I was working in the provincial system support program at CAMH, and they just invited me in because I was working in, you know, the province and, you know, could be in touch with the communities if there was some relevancy. And so that was really important for me. And I was, I have to say I was surprised, you know, as I'm coming in to meet with the community and I've already learning that they're doing ceremonies together, and Sam and some of the other non-Indigenous researchers were also participating in sweats in the ceremonies. And I thought this is really unique. And so I really appreciated that opportunity to continue to work with the team. And then as some of our communities got to know some of the work that we were doing, we started to be invited in one of the communities that Sam, myself, and Christine Abel, who's now the Director of Wellness Innovation for Shkaabe Makwa, we spent a week in a remote community celebrating Treaty Days. And it was because the chief said, you know, before we have any research relationship, you just got to come and be here. You just got to come and spend time with us. And so we did that. And it was a really beautiful experience, spending time in the community. And those are the opportunities that, you know, when we have to, you know, the chief kind of calls us at any time, you know, to speak around, you know, what we're doing in the community. And those are times that we have to navigate really carefully. And I would say as a First Nations researcher, that I'm always mindful of our space. And I remember when he kind of passed me the mic, I was not necessarily knowing that that was going to happen at that moment, that I was going to address hundreds of people that were at the opening for Treaty Days. And the way that I talked to the community about what we were there is that we were just there to, you know, listen and learn and participate in Treaty Days and really, you know, figure out ways that we could support the community because we come from CAMH. And after the chief came up to me and he said, oh, he said, I'm so glad you didn't mention the word research. And I said, oh, and I said, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. And he said, well, I'm glad, because he said, I might have had to deal with that later. So I think those are little, you know, pieces that we just kind of have in our backpack, you know, because we've been immersed in these relationships with our communities. And what I would say around the learning for our non-Indigenous colleagues, it's really just, you know, walking with us, you know, like I think Sam and others, scientists that we're working with at CAMH really, you know, are on that pathway, and we're in this together. We sort out the conundrums together, we vision together, we go to ceremonies together, and really recognizing that spiritual, I would say, setting that we're really trying to convene. And last week, you know, we launched another research project that we have funded by Health Canada's Substance Use and Addiction Programs. And it's we're co-designing a virtual alcohol withdrawal management service. And we had two of our partners, one from Northwestern Ontario and one from Manitoulin Island, on site with us at CAMH last week. And we sat in ceremony together in the morning and we talked about our intentions. We talked about why we are doing this. And of course, our non-Indigenous colleagues were also within our ceremony circle as well. And as we spent the day together, listening and working and planning and really culminating our efforts, that evening we went into the sweat lodge together. And it was interesting because our addiction medicine doctor, who had been in clinic all day long, came to the sweat lodge at about 6 o'clock and wasn't necessarily thinking that he was going to be part of the lodge, but ended up going into the lodge. And so, and I think that that is also really important, is just picking up those pieces of when we're invited in to connect. And I think maybe the last thing that I really want to acknowledge about allies is that because CAMH is one of Canada's leading research centers, there's a lot of research that happens here. And so sometimes some of our colleagues are discovering really important information that is not necessarily being addressed. And whether it's that we've learned that a screener for violence shows false positives for First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, or whether it's showing that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have longer wait times at hospitals across the province. They're bringing that information to us and asking us if, you know, we would like to review the data and maybe collaborate on different research projects. And that's what I really appreciate as well, is that, you know, they're not necessarily, they know this is important and they're not, you know, leading these on their own. They're coming to us and they're sharing that with us out of respect. So I wanted to acknowledge that role within allyship as well. Miigwech.
Thank you, Rennie. Thank you so much. I think that's incredibly important. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions, reach out, you know, lower any unrealistic expectations of what it means to be an ally or what you should know and what you shouldn't know, and lean into that relationship, because amazing things can happen when you're in a meaningful relationship with others. So thank you so much. Okay, so we'll move on, just looking at time here. We're going to move on to our next question. This one is for you, Trisha. Okay, so I'll read the question. As both a community advisory circle member for the First Nations Wellness Initiative and a community member collaborating on research with CAMH, what do you see as the most important principles guiding research relationships? And what challenges have you faced? And how can researchers better support individuals and communities? And how can guests and allies strengthen their relationships with communities?
Okay, thank you, Shelly. I was just reflecting on some of what's been shared already today in the panel. And something that Dr. Robbins had shared is also where I was thinking. And I think it boils down to relevancy. So if it's a project that isn't necessarily, like maybe the community isn't ready for that particular project right now, and if that's the case, that's okay. Then you just kind of move on, and that kind of leads into the next principle I was thinking of, which is respect. So you respect that maybe they're not ready. Maybe something has happened within the community that has changed the climate of the community from when you first created the research proposal. So having that respectful relationship and acknowledgement of where the community is at, where the research team is at, is very important. And then the others, I'm trying to remember what the second part of the question was.
So maybe you could chat a little bit about some challenges that you faced, and how can researchers better support both the individual but also the community?
Awesome, thanks. So also leaning into the respect element, something that we've done for the Finwe project within Wiikwemkoong is create the community advisory circle. So that's the research circle that is established of community members who are passionate and really have heart and want to see our community well. So something that we really appreciated, and something that I really believe that all research teams should work to do, is help to strengthen the capacity of community to be able to do research and to be able to be reflective and provide support on different projects. Whether that be OCAP training, having them get the tools, and it might even spark a new career and a new aspiration for some community members who weren't aware of what research entails. And in doing so, we build not only individual communities, but you also build Indigenous communities across Turtle Island as a whole, because we are all able to contribute to research beyond this one project. So that's definitely something that I know that we've really appreciated within our community, is having that opportunity to be able to bring in those different tools and to help build that capacity, so community members are more informed, and research doesn't become such a scary word anymore. It's something that's uplifting and it has benefits, which reroutes us back to the importance of relevancy. So how is it going to benefit the community? And I think these are all pieces that really need to be considered and haven't necessarily been considered in the past. And then the other part of the question had to do with allies strengthening roles or relationships with communities. Very much similar to what Dr. Linklater had shared. I think it's important that research team members build that relationship, and it does take time. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that might even take a year to a year and a half till community members are comfortable and they're familiar with who you are and what you do. And when you come in, you're often welcomed. Our Indigenous communities are very warm and very welcoming, and we do a lot of laughter and there's a lot of sharing. And once we're joking with you and making fun of you, that's when you know you've kind of have a leg to stand on. So that's just something I think is also really important, is to make sure you attend community events, and not necessarily sitting at a booth and answering questions, but also just kind of walking around, visiting, getting to know people, and making yourself be seen, but also in a respectful way, and to be mindful of your space and where you fit within those circles. Miigwech.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing. And, you know, it's been an honor working with you for the last 2 years in collaboration. I just wanted to lift that up. Trisha is one of our community advisory circle members in Wiikwemkoong, and she's been central to the work that we've been doing. And we've learned so much from Trisha about respectful relationship engagement. And you honor us with your presence here today, Trisha. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last panelist question, and then we have an audience question as well, and then we'll get some closing remarks from Dr. Rennie Linklater. So our last question is for Sam. Sam, as an ally, how do you build and maintain trust beyond a single project? How do you ensure your work supports community priorities and fosters ongoing reciprocal relationships? How have you adapted your approach based on community feedback and their evolving needs?
Thank you for the questions. These are really excellent questions, by the way, Shelly. So thank you. And they're so crucial to establish like these. I think this conversation is just so important for anyone endeavoring to do research involving First Nations communities. You could write a book about it, so it's really hard to put it all in an hour, actually. But I think the one thing I was going to say about trust is it's not something that you take for granted, and it's not something that happens instantly. It takes time, and also it's precious, so it can be lost, and that means that anyone doing research, and I think one of the things I just need to acknowledge right now is that, especially in the Western model of research, scientists and researchers don't often have a lot of time, right? They're busy, and there are expectations placed on them in terms of their performance. So publishing, getting another grant, you know, like those are pressures on them. And so within that model, though, I think it's really, really important that time be dedicated to trust. And it's not just one meeting. It's multiple meetings. It's many conversations. It's constant engagement. And sitting down and taking time. So if a scientist doesn't want to, it wants to stay inside their office next to a desk and a computer, that's not the scientist who wants to do research involving First Nations communities, because it's about going to community and sitting down in community and going, like Trisha said, and thank you, Trisha, and you're reminding me how important it is to not just also sit down with a community advisory circle. That's important, yes, but going to community for community events and participating in those events and being part of the community but also mindful that you are a guest in that community, you know, and that's also really important as well. So trust can be lost very quickly, and that's true of any relationship. It's a relationship. It's an exchange, and it's an ongoing relationship with multiple conversations. And part of that as well is, and I think that's part of the second part of your question is, what if the community says, well, wait a minute, we don't want to do it this way, or we don't like this. It's not just about going, oh, okay, well, thank you, we'll take that, we'll take your comment and think it through. It's actually acting on the comment. It's actually taking the comment and going, okay, let's pivot, let's change, let's remove that question altogether, or is there a way to revise it? So it's actually following through. And I think that's another piece that happens sometimes with researchers is they go, okay, we'll have a consultation session, we'll hear your input, and see you later, thanks a lot, and not actually integrate those considerations. And that's a problem. And that actually affects that trust and the relationship piece. And so again, if you're a researcher who's not willing to devote that time, this isn't for you. This is, this is about a conversation that's ongoing, and it's always about that relationship. And so I think that's really important. And I'm just trying to think through evolving. That I think I'm getting at that. I'm sort of looking at the questions of like, how have you adapted your approach based on community feedback? So it's always taking time to think through what the community really wants. And I think at the bottom line is, even though the researchers have to perform for their institutions and so on, I think there really has to be a commitment from the researcher to fulfill the goals of the research, not just in terms of your CV, but in terms of how you're going to meaningfully support the community. And actually, really, will there be benefits to the community? And I think really, if you're not there to support the community and actually help the community, then maybe you shouldn't be there, So maybe those are some pieces that I think are really important. And so thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam. I love what you said, and I think it's really important. We often talk about this is you may not understand processes or cultural practices or ceremony, but you certainly need to respect them. And again, it's not just what you say, but it's how you do it. And so it's taking that time, adapting to community direction, implementing, methodology that's community led and driven. All of these ways that you can continuously build that relationship and engage in that collaboration with community. So thank you so much, Sam, and everyone for all of your insights. We have a question submitted by one of the audience members, and we have a little bit of time left. So I think I'll read the question, and then perhaps maybe Julian, you could answer the question, and then I'll hand it over to Rennie for some final thoughts, just looking that we have about 6 minutes left. So the question is, do you often find that organizations that want to engage in research with Indigenous communities either don't have a strong data sovereignty or data governance plan, or they have one that is uninformed and or ill-conceived? How can this be improved if so?
Good question. Don't necessarily find that. What we find at more is that they may have the best plan in the world, kind of thing, right? But if they don't have their finger on the pulse in terms of what's happening in First Nations communities, then it's going to be very difficult for them for that plan to have meaning. So what we try to emphasize and reemphasize is that this is like a very developing area in First Nations communities right now. There are some that are further along than others. There's no, it's a patchwork quilt situation like across the country, right? So, one of the things we're going to be doing is bringing together, that's Rennie's idea of bringing together some people from nationally to Shkaabe Makwa that are working on the ground in areas of, let's say, health data research and health research, and talking about like how they're addressing their approach to First Nations, Métis, or Inuit Indigenous data sovereignty and governance. Right? So it's really exciting. It's really exciting to see communities sort of becoming more aware of like OCAP principles and like using those principles to realize that they actually have a seat at the table with respect to, especially rights-bearing First Nations communities in terms of compliance and working with organizations to help the community steward their own data if that's something that they want to do. So I think, I think that's the thing. We're going to see that happening more and more. So I would say, like, it's not about the plan. It's about making sure that you're tuned into what's happening on the ground in First Nations communities, and aligning your plan with that.
Thank you, Julian. It's exciting. It's exciting. It's so exciting what communities are doing in terms of data sovereignty, and we're seeing this unfold all over Turtle Island. And I can't wait to see and support communities in that initiative. Okay, so Rennie, given your leadership and expertise, we would be honored if you could share some closing remarks with us and maybe highlight a few key takeaways for everyone joining us today.
Yeah, Miigwech, Shelly, and really, a good heartfelt thank you to all of my colleagues here. And what's really amazing is that there's a couple of us sitting at our Queen Street site at CAMH, where Shkaabe Makwa is located. And we have a few people who are in community today as well, very far away from us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, that it's this coming together no matter where we are, that really, I think, strengthens that work. And, as we hear today, we hear how important it is not only around community engagement, but really setting up that processes where research is grounded, really importantly through advisory circles. We have processes where we continue to do updates to chief and councils. And those are the really important relationship pieces and governance pieces, which we really need to pay attention to. And, I'm also mindful, because we've had the opportunity to work very closely with a number of First Nation communities who are involved in our First Nations Wellness Initiative. We're also working with other Inuit and Métis communities as well in better understanding what not only the research needs are, but also within data governance as well. And so Inuit Tipira Kanatami has a national Inuit research strategy. And I just want to do a shout out to their work, because as First Nations talk about OCAP and principles, there's other frameworks which are important to recognize for distinction-based Indigenous peoples. And so those distinction-based are First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and we recognize the diversities within our communities. And Métis National Council also has research principles as well. And, there is a lot of work going on across our lands, and it's really inspiring. And so I would really encourage people to reach out and, connect with Knowledge Centers, see what's on the website, see what different academic institutions are bringing forward. And just as a final thought, I remember those days when I was receiving graduate student funding from the Indigenous Health Research Development Program. And a group of us were walking in Halifax, and we were talking about the 4 R's in Indigenous research that Verna Kirkness and Ray Barnhart had brought forward: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. And we were like, hey, there's a 5th R, and it's relationship. And so with that, I just want to say Miigwech, Marcy, and Nakumak to all of you who have joined us today. Thank you. Thank you, Shelly, for moderating.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for our audience. So grateful that you've entered into this relationship and are curious and are learning more. Please feel free to reach out to anyone if you have any questions, or if you want to collaborate in some sort of research. Take good care, everyone.
Miigwech.